Hello and welcome to this presentation on the requirements and guidance for planting new hedgerows through farming with nature within the Sustainable Agriculture Programme. The aim of this action is to create new lengths of hedgerows planted with native species where no hedge currently exists. We are going to discuss the requirements when planting new hedgerows, guidance to plant new hedgerows, and the supporting items available, including fencing requirements. Requirements. This action must not be carried out on A. Fields within an area designated as a special area of conservation, a special protection area, a Ramsar site, or an area of special scientific interest. B. Northern Ireland priority habitat and species areas, or C. Permanent grassland sensitive areas. Hedgerows must not also be planted against an existing hedgerow, against a stone wall, under the shade of an existing tree line or woodland, or on the field side of a 2-metre riparian buffer strip. Requirements continued. Planting must be carried out where no hedgerow currently exists or a continuous gap of at least 10 metres exists. A minimum of 10 metres to be planted to the maximum funding available per applicant, meaning each individual length of hedgerow must be a minimum of 10 metres. Only native species must be planted with an average of 6 plants per metre. 3 or more native species must be planted from the hedge plant species list. Hedgerows must be protected from damage by grazing livestock and wildlife on all sides as required. Requirements further continued. Growth must not be negatively affected by weeds. Management must be carried out to establish successfully and manage the full length of the hedgerow. Evidence of the hedgerow species used, including the invoices detailing the species and quantities applied, must be retained. Work must be completed by the last day of February of the same scheme year. Planting site location. The new hedge should aim to link with existing habitats such as hedges, woodland or ponds, and act as a new wildlife corridor between the two habitats. New hedges should not be planted in front of an existing stone wall, and damaged stone walls could be alternatively restored by their owner at their own cost, as demonstrated in the picture shown. If you intend to plant a new hedgerow along a marching boundary, you must ensure that you have fully discussed and agreed that you can carry out the option requirements on the march boundary with the person who has control of the neighbouring land. Moving on to site preparation, it is highly recommended to spray a 1 metre wide strip with a systemic herbicide in the autumn. Following the sprayed 1 metre wide strip in the autumn, planting is completed much easier if a half-metre wide trench is dug to a depth of 0.3 metres with a small excavator. The topsoil should be flipped and placed at the bottom of the trench, with the subsoil placed on top of the flipped sod. On low nutrient soils, it is beneficial to add some well-rotted farmyard manure into the bottom of the trench to aid soil nutrition that is going to help support the new growing hedgerow once it has been planted. Guidance. The planting mix. The specification requires 3 or more native hedge species to be planted. To optimize the biodiversity benefit, it is strongly recommended to plant a mix of 6 different native species, with 75% of the hedge consisting of hawthorn and 25% of other woody species. Mix the species across the length of the hedgerow to ensure a diverse hedgerow, and wherever possible use planting stock of local provenance and species that already grow in the local area. Species can be selected from the list shown. For shaded areas, it is recommended that holly be planted. Ideally, all trees or shrubs should be Irish sourced and grown, or alternatively UK sourced and grown. Planting density. To comply with this action, an average of 6 native plants must be planted per metre. Alternatively, for a more stock-proof hedge, it is recommended to plant a double staggered row with 30 centimetres between the rows and 25 centimetres between each of the plants in a row. This is approximately 7 to 9 plants per metre. This planting arrangement is shown in the diagram on the right-hand side of the slide. Planting. Hedgerows are to be planted between November and late winter, which is during the plant's dormant season. Do not plant in waterlogged or frozen soils, as this would inhibit growth and root development and potentially kill new whips. If planting on a dry bank, it is recommended that you plant in November or December to allow adequate root establishment before budburst. Planting continued. If there is a delay in planting, it is imperative to keep the whip's roots moist by heeling them into soil or sand, but also not stored in solely water. Keep in a plastic bag during transport, because if the roots dry out, the whips may die. Plant whips at the same depth at which they were grown in the nursery, shown by a change in colour on the stem above the roots, which is demonstrated on the picture to the left side of the screen. Plant the whip with the stems upright. After the whips have been planted in the correct depth and upright, firm the soil around the plants by treading it well with your heel, removing any air pockets. It is also important to know that during prolonged dry spells, the planted area may require some watering. Once planted, prune all the hedge plants to 4 to 5 inches off the ground as shown in the picture to the right side of the screen. Pruning the plants will allow the whips to develop into a multi-stemmed shrub rather than a single-stemmed tree. Do not prune hollies and trees. Guidance: Hedgerow trees. Hedgerow trees are an important component of hedgerows across Northern Ireland, and although not mandatory for this action, it is recommended that they are included. Tree species can be selected from the DAERA list of approved hedgerow tree species, which is shown on the bottom of this slide. Hawthorn whips can also be left to grow on as trees. The use of local provenance planting stock is strongly recommended. It is important to be aware that hedgerow trees must not be planted in the proximity of under or above ground cables. It is also important to consider the size of the tree when fully grown and any impact this may have on visibility at field entrances. The frequency of trees will depend on future management. 4 trees in a 100-meter length of hedgerow is suggested. Protect each tree from browsing livestock with a minimum of 1.2-meter tree guard and stake. This will allow identification of the tree so it is not trimmed during the hedge cutting in the consecutive future years. Weed control. To aid successful establishment, a form of weed control is recommended immediately following planting. Ideally use biodegradable film over the entire planted area which is tucked under the soil and are held down using stones or gravel. The biodegradable film is to be used along both sides of the newly planted hedge, with the film held down using stones or gravel as previously mentioned. It is important also to know that the film can be removed once the hedge has become well established. Composted bark shipping mulch can also be used as an alternative to the film. Moving on to supporting items. To support the environmental action of planting a new hedgerow, the supporting item of protective fencing is available. Protective fencing requirements. Fencing support will only be available in association with hedging approved under this scheme. All fencing materials must be new, commercially available, and protect the environmental action from grazing livestock. The fencing must be permanent, and the wire must be galvanized and strained to straining posts. There must be a minimum of 5 strands of wire or sheet mesh with 2 strands of wire. When planting new hedgerows, fencing must be no more than 3 meters from the center of the hedgerow on average. The maximum fencing that will be funded will be twice the length of approved new hedgerow. It is a requirement to look after a newly planted hedge to ensure successful establishment. The hedge must be protected from grazing livestock, and if rabbits or hares are present, it is highly recommended to include chicken wire as part of the protective fence. The protective fencing, if claimed within the scheme, must be no more than 3 meters from the center of the hedgerow on average. Further guidance to protective fencing. The following points should be noted for guidance for installing protective fencing. If fencing along roadways, the Department of Infrastructure (DOI) approval is required. Fences should be at least 1.2 meters in height from the ground to the top wire, and posts should be no more than 3 meters apart. Straining posts should be no more than 150 meters apart and also added at each change in the direction or gradient. It is also recommended that the fencing is at least 1 meter from the center of the hedgerow on average. This will allow weed control to take place in the initial years after planting and for the hedge and fencing to be compliant within the 3-meter requirement. When fully established, you are aiming for tall and wide hedgerows for the greatest environmental benefits. Aftercare and further weed control. Aftercare. Weeds must be suppressed. Failed or dead plants need to be replaced in the following planting season to ensure a minimum of 6 plants per meter to follow the scheme requirements. Remember to check that tree guards are kept intact. Weed control in the initial years of growth. During the first 3 to 4 years, it is important to manage the weeds throughout the growing season. This can be done by trampling and flattening the weeds on both sides of the hedge and hand pulling the grass and weeds away from the center of the hedge. It is advised not to cut the grass and weeds on either side of the hedge as this will encourage regrowth of weeds. A pre-emergence granular herbicide may be used, and it is advised to avoid using other herbicides as you may kill off the hedge. If a composted bark mulch was used initially, top this up as required. Through Farming with Nature, you can apply for the management of hedgerows action in the year after planting to support their aftercare. More details, including specification, video materials and guidance, are available to view on the DARA website. Thank you for listening to the Farming with Nature Planting New Hedgerows Requirements and Guidance.